So, hello everybody. We're going to be talking about Agile project management. So it's a methodology. Luckily now it's gained a bit in popularity. So like 8 years ago when I started working with it, nobody knew what it was. So it's nice to see people use it. And we're focusing it mostly for people who are looking to apply it in some way in your organization, primarily in your nonprofit, although I know there's some people here working for shops, so we'll do a little bit of all of that. So I'm Monica, and I came out of the nonprofit world. So I used to work for nonprofits, and then I switched over because I was always working with vendors building apps and websites, and then I got swiped by a company, and I went over to the other side. So for the last couple years, I've been working on that side. Right now I work for Advomatic, which is a shop that's in Lower Manhattan, although we have a virtual team all over. We do websites, apps, spans the gamut, and I use Agile. I'm a project manager, and I basically run the department there.
Okay, I'm Reiss. I am working as a project manager at the Center for Court Innovation. And if you haven't heard of our nonprofit, we are trying to do something that has its challenges. We're trying to change the way the criminal justice system works in New York and beyond. So my role is to work on a variety of technology projects at different sites around New York City. I also have a couple of other things that I do. I have a pretty active blog at nonprofitbridge.com, where I talk not only about technology, but also about communications and fundraising. And lastly, when I have nothing else to do, I also do a lot of volunteer work with seniors. I work for several organizations. I do some technology training, I do some meal delivery, many different things to help seniors to have more fulfilling lives.
So we're supposed to stand next to each other because of the, so I'm just sort of unnaturally close.
But that's okay, we like each other anyway, so that's okay.
So.
All right, so these are the questions that we're going to be covering tonight. And we're going to start with the base, which is basically what is project management, how does it relate to, what challenges do we have, especially how it relates to the nonprofit community. And then we're going to drill down on how the Agile methodology fits in. Agile is one type of how you can do project management. There's also waterfall, which we won't talk about tonight. But Agile is something that has caught on a lot in recent years. It's some people have adopted it for all of their work, but we'll talk about when it's appropriate, when it's not. And then finally, we'll talk practically, how can you actually use Agile for some of the projects that you're using at your nonprofit. And you don't have to be a technologist, you don't have to be building software, which is how a lot of project management got started. I think hopefully there'll be something here for everyone, whatever your role is at your organization. Okay, so the first thing we want to get across is, regardless of what your title is, I mean, my title happens to be project manager, but my bet is that no matter what you do at your nonprofit or other organization, you probably do some type of project management, whether you think of it in that way or not. So basically, the idea is how you get things done, how you plan things, how you coordinate resources, and let's go into a little bit about what projects include. So for example, a project is something that's temporary. It's not something that you do on an ongoing basis for all the time. It's something that has a beginning and an end. So that's the one defining factor versus anything else you may do at your job that's recurrent. Secondly, it's creating something that's unique. You're creating a new software product, you're moving on to a new platform, you're adopting some new way of doing things at your organization. And there's usually a series of steps that are involved in that process. And that's, as the project manager role evolves, you're basically laying out what are the steps, who's going to be involved, do any of those steps depend on each other, basically just laying out the process of how it's going to play out over time. And then a project is not, again, something that is the way you normally do things in your job. It's normally some bit of change that you're introducing to your organization, which in itself introduces challenges, because as we know, most organizations are resistant to change. And one of the challenges that we have as a project manager is to explain to people why this is a good thing and why they should be, maybe they're not happy about it, but they at least to explain to them how they will benefit from what we're doing. And again, a project manager is someone who will get involved in a lot of these things. You can go forward, who applies knowledge, tools, skills, processes to meet the requirements of a particular project.
I mean, the reason why we wanted to bring this up, this is a 101, obviously, what is a project, is just to have you sort of abstract from it a little bit and think about, even if you're not a project manager, you probably encounter things like this every day in your organization, so even if you don't think of yourself that way. We're going to be talking about ways in which you might apply this to projects that aren't just tech projects. And that's something I think people haven't thought about applying Agile in that way. So that's why we're sort of going back to basics here.
Oh, by the way, I just wanted to, I didn't say this at the beginning. If you have questions for us,
Please,
don't feel that you have to wait for the end. We're happy to entertain questions throughout the presentation. So what exactly do project managers do? Well, obviously, what are the requirements? What are the resources? What are the, what funds do you need available if you're buying a software product, if you need to bring in something from the outside? What kind of budget do you have? A lot of nonprofits in particular are very resistant to think about what their budget is. They go to a vendor and they say, well, we want to do this, we haven't thought about the budget, and vendors hate that. I'm sure those of you that work for consulting firms probably have had this experience where they come to a nonprofit and say, well, we really don't know, we want to see what the proposals come back. But there's a big difference between having a budget of $5,000 or having a budget of $50,000, especially if you're building a website. So, and a timeline. Nonprofits sometimes can be not great about planning what the timeline will be. Sometimes projects will drag out over time, and sometimes time is a priority and sometimes it's not. And that will affect how the project is planned and how it actually plays out. And again, what type of quality is required for the project? If you're if you're rolling out a software platform or a new CRM, a new website, does it need to meet some kind of standard or criteria that the organization has set forth?
Plus, I think it's nice to remember that that piece is in there. Sometimes people talk about the triangle: requirements, budget, and timeline. And you definitely can do it faster, you can do it cheaper, but you're going to have to, if you do it quicker, you're going to sacrifice other things, right? So you have to keep them all balanced, and that's always the challenge of managing projects. And quality is definitely one of the things that's in the mix.
And then one of the other things about those of us that have done project management for a while is that one of the critical aspects is to identify stakeholders. Stakeholders are anybody who has an interest in the results of a project. And very often, the people that you think are your stakeholders are just a fraction of those, because there's outside people, there's customers, there's a lot of people who are involved in this that you may not have thought of. And it's really important to not only think about who's going to use the product, who's going to use the website, who's going to use the database, but who has an interest, board members, other people that donate to the organization, people that have an interest in the organization. There's usually a much wider group of stakeholders than what you initially think. And it's important that you identify that up front, because what sometimes will happen with a project is that you'll get started and you'll get halfway done, and someone will come out of the woodwork and say, well, why wasn't I included in this? And what about this? And what about that? So even if people don't respond, even if you send people emails and you leave phone messages and they don't respond, you have to give them the opportunity to be involved if you think there's any possibility that they will have an interest in this project.
I would say in managing projects for all of these years that, I mean, this is challenging, right? But it's so easy to forget about this piece. And we have a name for it. We call it parachuting in, or stakeholders parachuting in, and it always happens in the final quarter of the project. So yeah, it's good to not forget about that.
Okay, so continue. And then obviously, what kind of team will you have on your project? The people who work on a project normally come from different parts of the organization. A project manager very rarely has direct supervisory control over the people on the team. So it's not only do you have to have technical knowledge of how to manage a project, but you have to be able to deal with people, and you have to be able to work with people who are in different locations, different nationalities, different cultures, different time zones, and you have to really figure out how is that going to work out? How are you going to build the team? If you can't get together physically, how can you basically let everybody know they're included in the group. It's really important to do that so that people don't feel left out, especially a lot of us now work with people at many different locations and we don't have a chance to actually walk over to their desk. You really got to include that. That's sometimes more important than the technical piece. And what a surprise, the best laid plans of a very trained project manager, projects don't always go according to plan. And that's actually one of the reasons why we're talking about Agile tonight, but we'll get more into that later. And then, especially being at a nonprofit, that makes it even more challenging because now you're dealing with a situation where, as I mentioned, the budget is kind of vague and the priorities can change on a moment's notice. So again, there's a lot of things to consider in why this kind of work can, even though it sounds, like it should be relatively straightforward, there's a lot of things that can booby trap you along the way. And we're going to try to give you some pointers and tips that we hope will help. Now, so just to sort of bring you into the conversation, for those of you that are currently involved in projects right now at your organizations, what types of challenges are you facing right now? Well, what type of challenges do you think that we haven't yet mentioned come up in the type of projects that you work with?
What takes them down, the projects that you're working on now? Yeah.
Well, we're trying just to the stakeholder piece. We're working on a new website, and we're trying to have all the stakeholders that we know will come in at the last quarter talk now.
Yeah.
And we're emailing them and giving them certain tasks, but they're not really responding. So we know
Yeah, I'm just going to repeat the questions for the benefit of those that are on the video. The question was about you're building a new website and you want to get feedback from people, but they don't respond. And that's very typical. Unfortunately, that's very typical. The only suggestion I will make is that people respond to different forms of communication. Sometimes email is the right way, sometimes a personal visit is the right way. You have to find out how they want to be contacted, and if you try multiple ways of reaching them and they still don't respond, make sure you document that you try to reach them and you try to get their feedback, but more than that, really, you can't do.
Yeah, so let's try, I think we're just going to sort of collect some challenges because we're going to talk a little bit later about how Agile might address some of these. So we'll just flip through a few really quick.
Yes?
I'm in a marketing function, and one of my challenges is always differing opinions among the top stakeholders.
Yes.
The two people whose opinions matter, they don't agree with each other.
Okay.
Stakeholders. Yeah.
Cross projects, multiple projects within an organization, how do you, from a project management across the organization, balance which ones go first, who gets the budget, so PMO kind
So
of
almost like
questions.
resource management or scheduling of projects or
It's PMO,
Yeah.
project management,
Got it.
office level.
high level? Yeah, that's interesting.
I think that sometimes the goals or the manner that certain types of project management happen are at odds with the mission of some nonprofits. So sometimes project management comes from a place that's very corporate or very technical, and in some mission-driven organizations, either the people you serve don't work that way or on that timeline, or they don't have that familiarity, and those things are conflicting.
So like a cultural conflict between the organization and the people, the style in which you're running the project.
Yes, actually the second one is maybe more germane to the discussion, and that is the idea of working with outsourced partners. If you are using an agile methodology within your organization, working with outsourced partners that are contractually connected to you, how do you continue to maintain the agile methods, but deal with contracted resources?
Okay.
Yes.
Sometimes project requirements are not clearly defined upfront.
Oh, that never happens in real life.
And that needs to be worked on.
Okay, so again, the question was about project requirements not being well defined. And I'm just taking some notes on these so we can go back later on during our presentation and try to address some of these issues.
We struggle sometimes with documenting what all the next steps are. The tools we use tend to be very granular, and then the high-level stakeholders need business language to what they're looking for next. So we spend a lot
So addressing needs of different people in the organization who
And
have
how
a,
you document that, and so everyone's on the same page.
So this is sort of a combo of both of these. Obviously, the Agile methodology is not going to fix all of these issues, but there's some concepts behind it that might be applicable, and that's what we're going to sort of try and drill down into a little bit. So now we get into what is it, actually? And I think now that it's become such a buzzword, it's funny how people will take ownership of it and be like, oh, I know what it is. We do this at our organization, and that's Agile. And someone else will be like, oh, well, we do this, and that's Agile, right? There's so many different threads. So it's kind of hard to, if you're focusing just on how it manifests itself, it can look so many different ways. So what we're going to try and do is just break it down a little bit. For those of you who already know what Agile is, this might be some of it a little 101, but we're going to get a little more complex, and we're going to end with a big discussion, so we'll have a chance to kind of move into different people's concerns. But this is the original definition, right? Should I switch and hold that?
Sure.
Down? Then you don't have to be tied too much to each other, as fun as it is. Oh.
yeah, this is sort of how things got started years ago. This matter, if you look on the web, Agile Manifesto,
Yeah.
this is how it was originally laid out.
This is the, so individuals and interactions over processes and tools. In other words, more important. The thing on top is more important than the thing below. Working software over comprehensive documentation, customer collaboration over contract negotiation, responding to change over following a plan. So this is sort of when it came out in the software development world. And you have to think this came from people building a product in-house. So there's no external vendor, client, or anything like that. It's in-house, building a software product, right? Mostly custom. So it was a particular world in which it gave birth to this manifesto, which was basically trying to undo some of the bad project techniques that were causing so many projects to go south. So this is the original statement. This is just my statement, which is essentially it's a mindset. It's really like changing the way that you deal with risk, you deal with uncertainty, and the way that you, it's kind of a philosophy. And I think there's ways to take that philosophy and apply it in your own situation, in your own context, for your own project, and the process might end up looking different, but the benefits are still there. And I think what has happened so much since Agile's gotten so popular is people try and apply just the process. And then it's like, oh, well, that didn't work. Okay, so also they think, well, Agile's the new thing, so it must be great. It's going to save all of my projects. But actually, Agile's not great for everything, right? And that's what we're going to talk about too. So just know this is not a sales pitch for Agile in any way. It's something that works for some projects, in some cases, for some teams, in some contexts. And so the question today is there a place for you in which you can use this? And that's what we're going to try and help you think about. So what are some of the elements of the Agile mindset? So this idea of working collaboratively. You say teams, right? Everyone's like, you work as a team. We all work as a team. But I can't tell you how many companies that I go into or companies, organizations on the vendor side or teams that I work with, development teams, where really what the developer wants or what the staff person wants, they want to be told what to do, what's my to-do item, then I'm going to go off and I'm going to do it, and then I'm going to come back and deliver it, right? So there's not a lot of actual real-time, constant collaboration. And this way of working requires that kind of communication because of the way things are constantly changing. This idea of planning just enough and just in time, this reminded me of what you said about the documentation, was you, right? So it's hard to find that balance. There's this way in which you think, oh, I'm terrified, there's this project, it's going to fail. So we have to document every tiny little thing before we start. And that's the thing that's going to make this project go well, right? And so people went so far the other way that they documented too much. However, you can't also just start, right? You can't just start. You have to have some idea of what you're doing. So you need to plan a little, but not too much. So this is, finding that balance is another piece of the mindset. This idea of stopping and regrouping. So for those of you who know about Agile, you hear about, I don't know, iterations or sprints or all of that terminology, which we can talk about. But really what it is is like, let's just stop. Let's stop and take stock of the situation and figure out where we are and get a real-time view of what's left to do and how we're doing so far, and more than that, to change the process. So it's not like you decide on this Agile process at the beginning, or whatever your process is, and then you just sort of follow it through the whole project, right? You have to constantly be changing it. My team has been using it for years now, the team that I work with now, and the process is different now than it was a month ago. Like, we've already changed it, we change it constantly, and it's necessary that you do that. Getting feedback many times along the way. There's this way in which you kind of don't want feedback. You're like, I'm just going to go away, I'm going to build this thing, and I'm going to deliver it to them, and it'll be what they asked for. That's what they wanted, right? So I've done my job, right? But it always backfires. I mean, I can just say, right? So if there's a way in which it backfires, people are like, well, that's what I told you, but that's not what I really wanted. So there's this concept, this mindset of getting feedback many times along the way and not being afraid of that, like actually being happy with that.
I just want to add something about this point, about the question that came up before. You have to make sure that people at your organization understand that they need to be involved, especially if you're using Agile. They can't just like be involved at the beginning and have a couple of meetings and then walk away and come back at the end. That's not the way this works. And if people expect that, this is not going to work for your organization. They have to make a commitment to be involved throughout the process. And that's what makes this work. If they're not going to, if they're too busy and they're only going to like answer you like 2 weeks after you send them a message, or they can't even manage a 15-minute or 30-minute meeting, then you're going to have a problem. So you have to lay out at the beginning that this is a collaborative process. It's not like, you meet at the beginning and then you walk away. You have to be involved.
And if they see the value of it, they'll do it, but sometimes they don't. And honestly, if they don't, it doesn't work. So there are some foundational things that do have to be in place. Getting feedback from actual users, right? That's so hard because you think, well, we're going to go away, we're going to build this thing. We're so sure we know what the people who are going to be using whatever the thing is, we know what they want. We feel like we've done enough taking in information, right? But it's funny how when something's on paper or in your mind, it's so different than when you're actually sitting there working with it. So how do you get them to be actually using it before all the money's gone or the timelines, ended, right? That's another sort of underlying concept.
Thing that I run into in my organization. If you talk to the managers who manage the people, they have one view, and the people who actually sit at the computer have another view. And if you don't talk to the people who actually do the entry, you'll be very surprised at the end that they don't want to use it because they weren't involved and they have a whole different perspective.
Totally, yeah. So you might as well get it out on the table early on.
Sometimes you've got to win a lot of trust in what's happening or get at the very user. That's being
right. Seeing it early. So this is to me almost is like the main concept, right? It's sort of the heart of it all. It's not pretending like stuff isn't going to go wrong. It's just knowing that it's going to go wrong, knowing that you're going to go into a wrong direction, knowing that you're going to make mistakes, and just fully embracing that and building a process that actually accommodates that in whatever way that is. And it may be different for your particular project, your particular organization, how you do that. So go ahead and fail and take pride in it, right? Because it's like, okay, that didn't work. Better to find out now $30,000 into the project as opposed to $100,000 into the project. Or if you're thinking of internal projects, just in terms of time and people hours and building trust. So you might as well do it early. So change happens, right? So how do you build a process around the ability to change course? This is terrifying to people, this idea that it's okay to change course, that you can, that it's fine, and that there's a process that has this, it builds a little comfy, well, maybe not comfy, but it's like a nest. It's a way in which you can sort of relax into the fact that change will happen, and there's a process that's built to handle that. And you have to constantly reprioritize. There a million times people are like, no, that definitely is most important, then we don't really need that. Then they see the first thing and they're like, now that I put it in front of people, they're not so into it. So we were going to do all this fancy stuff with that, so let's just skip that and move to the other thing. It changes. It always changes, so you have to constantly reprioritize. This is another thing, in tech world we call it technical debt, right? Fixing problems as you go. Here's so many projects. It's like, okay, that's not quite right. Let's put that on a list. That's not quite right. That's not quite, okay, well, yeah. And then it just kind of goes on this list that just gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And it just keeps getting longer throughout the project, the things that are not quite working. And you're like, all right, let's just get through this. And then we'll fix that thing, right? Instead of just going, you know what? It has to happen anyway. It's gotta happen anyway. So let's just do it now. And it's almost like going against all of your human nature things in you. It's like you just want to delay it, looking at the things that are wrong. So accepting that you have to take care of it as you go is a huge piece. And finally, this is what, if you are familiar with Agile, there's this thing called the MVP, or the minimum viable product, right? The thing that is just enough. So how do you get to that place where you can put it in front of people? And this applies to, this is not just tech projects. This is anything you might be working on. How do you get something that you can put in front of people? Okay, maybe it doesn't have this and that other thing, and they wanted that and they didn't have that, but it has sort of the idea of it so that they can start to give you feedback, right? So this piece of iterating, this idea of iterating is the hardest thing to explain. So I have a whole beautiful graphic just to talk about it. A lot of times people will think, okay, breaking it up into chunks. Well, what they mean by that then is, you know, phase one, or the first part, and then the second part, and then the third part, right? That's not iterating, right? That's actually incremental development, right? So the difference, the little graphic here is, here's incremental development, right? So it's like, first we build the foundation of the house, then we build the walls of the house, then we put a room in the house, then we build a little more on the walls, then we build the side of the roof, and then we put the roof on it, and then now we've got a house, right? So it's creating distinct and discrete parts, one after the other. Whereas iterating is, you revise versions of a complete whole. So how can you sketch out, you know, put a roof on, because it might rain like on day 2 of the project, so you might as well go ahead and sketch out the whole thing in its most simple form. This is such a hard concept for people, because they're like, but it has to have, but how can, no, we can't, unless there's no way. But really, if you think about it, it has to have a roof and 4 walls, and maybe the door doesn't have to lock, there doesn't have to be a chimney, there doesn't have to be a window, there doesn't have to be 2 bathrooms, there just needs to be a hole in the floor. You know, it needs the basics. What is the minimum viable product, the very simplest thing? Trying to define that with your team is a challenge, but it's an exercise that's worthwhile because it gets it out in front of people as soon as possible. Very briefly, here's the 2 methodologies visualized for you. Waterfall method, basically, figure it all out. Plan everything. Oh my God, it can't go wrong. We're going to think of every little thing, because that's being a good project manager, is to think of every possible eventual thing that could possibly go wrong, even though that is humanly impossible for any human. But yet, people still keep doing it, right? Design, develop, test. So basically, how is it going to look? Make it happen. This is in tech language, which I hate. I wish I could abstract it a little bit more. I should have done that. Basically, does it work? Try it out. Does the roof work? So we'll talk a little bit about this in a minute, but this process, I'm sort of mocking it right now because I'm like, Agile, it's so beautiful. But actually, sometimes this is just the best thing for the project. And we'll talk a little bit later about when it is the best thing.
Yeah, by the way, one of the problems with the waterfall method that I found is that by the time you start here and you think you have it all laid out, everything's pretty, and you got all the requirements, by the time you get down here, the requirements have changed.
Yeah, and what do you do then?
What you have, although it sounded good at the beginning, because everybody says that's what they wanted, now you have it to give to people, and they say, no, that's not going to work because things have changed, we got a new grid, we reorganized the organization, something has happened along the way, and that's why this sometimes breaks down.
One of the organizations that I started working at before they started a web project, they would produce a PD, like an actual printed requirements document that was like non-editable. It was like a PDF. And so like by day 2, it was completely out of date. And so I'd be like, so how do you, it'd be like putting a red line through, I mean, it wasn't built for change, because it does change. This is sort of a visual of the Agile methodology. So in a way, the best way to think of it is like do the whole project over and over and over again. So take the whole thing, and it's like a fractal or something. You're taking the whole thing and you're doing that every 1 week, 2 weeks, 4 weeks, whatever it is, whatever the period of time is that you're working, right? So try and sketch out the whole thing. So it's planning it, building the thing, testing it, fixing all the stuff that's wrong. And by build, it might just be like coming up with something. It could be a campaign, it could be an internal initiative. Put something out, try and find all the things that are wrong with it and fix those things, and then put it out in front of people, right? And then do that again after you've gotten feedback, right? So that's essentially the cycles that we're talking about
You
here.
actually have like 3 mini projects, and instead of one large project,
Yeah.
you have, each one is a project in itself.
I'm not going to spend much time on this, but these slides will be published. So if you want to know, what we're trying to do is just pull back a little bit from all the terminology, all of the process, you do this, then you do this, then you do this. So, but I do think it's important to know some of these terms, just because you'll hear them. The sprint or iteration is basically that cycle of time. It could be 1 day, it could be 7 days, it could be 2 months, whatever is the cycle of time that you come up with, right? Stand-up meetings, it's the point at which you're checking in with your team. And since it's collaborative, it has to happen often. In traditional Agile or Scrum methodologies, which is a kind of Agile, it's a daily stand-up. You want to make it quick, you want to get to the point, what is blocking you, what do you need to move forward, and it's absolutely non-negotiable that this communication happen. So again, it's laying the foundations. If some piece of this isn't there, it really starts to fall apart. Somebody's got to own it. Somebody's got to be like, I am representing the people who are going to use this thing or need this thing or whatever it is, and I'm going to make decisions on their behalf until I get feedback from them. That's what we call the product owner or the project owner or, the client. If it's the client, it could be anyone if you don't use that terminology. Scrum Master, this comes out of the Agile process, the Agile methodology. Scrum is a kind of Agile. The Scrum Master, it's like the project manager for it. It's like another word for it, but it's less about, hey, did you get that thing done? And more like, what can I do to help you guys move forward? It has a slightly different connotation to it. So you're part of the team, not standing outside of the team, basically assigning tasks to people. So I'm essentially a Scrum Master in the projects that I work on, and I'm just like, all right, I see there's a block here, and I'm able to be just high enough to be able to go, I see what's blocking that, I'm going to remove those blocks. And that's really what I'm doing, but as part of the team. User stories, it's a way to talk about what the needs are, not in terms of tasks, but in terms of end results. This totally changes things when you think about your requirements, not like do this, make this happen, do this, then do that, but start first with, all right, once I've done all of that, what will we have? Like, what will people be able to do or see or whatever after this thing is built or done or accomplished, right? So it's like you're framing it, your requirement, in a little story about who needs to do what. That makes a huge difference. It may not be applicable for you, but these are sort of a grab bag of things that you can pull from. Backlog is just another name. If you hear someone say backlog, it's just another name for all the stuff yet to be done. And so when we talk about reprioritizing, that's what you do. You go back into all the stuff that needs to be done, and you're like, actually, that's not so important anymore. Now that I see that, I don't need that anymore. We don't have money for that anymore. That's changed, right? That's all in the backlog. Story points, again, another terminology piece that comes from Scrum, which is just a way to estimate. So instead of being like, it's going to take me going in, the developers or on my team, but I see this also just working in nonprofits, it's hard to think like, it's going to take me 2 hours and 30 minutes to do this thing. But it's so much easier to just have a list of stuff and be like small, medium, large, extra large, small, extra large, medium. Just so that you can make decisions about it. And that's in essence what story points are. And release is essentially, in tech terms, it's putting it out for people to use in a place that they can see it, not in an environment where you're building it. But in non-tech terms, it's putting it out in front of people, whatever it is, putting it in front of them and getting them to use it. And having it be enough of a thing that whatever it is, they can actually kind of do it from start to finish and have something that is valuable to them. So now we're going to go back to some of the challenges that people brought up. Maybe you can help me remember what they are. So after hearing some of these concepts and just abstracting it back from any kind of specific process, you can start to sort of flesh out how or sort of have a sense of how some of these concepts might be helpful to you. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so I'm just going to mention some of the things that came up before. For example, project requirements not being clear.
Yeah.
Agile allows you to constantly adjust the requirements as you go along. You're not tied into what you said at the beginning. As you go along, by the way, a lot of users are not used to explaining what they do. So what they told you at the beginning may turn out to be totally untrue when you actually go in and see. If you actually go and watch them work, you may get a whole different impression from how the process is. So you no longer have to be scared about requirements changing. In fact, that's part of what Agile is about, that requirements will change. And then we had a question about competing priorities. That's something that Agile may not be able to help with, because if you have many different projects going on in the organization, there has to be somebody who can sort of say, this one is going to take priority, and that it's not going to be sidetracked by another one a month later. So that's that's not necessarily something that Agile.
Although there's something about in the project itself, just seeing a list of all of the things that you need and putting it in front of people and being like, right now, let's not decide. Let's just decide how important this stuff. Is this the whole world will end if we don't have this thing? Is it, it'd be nice if we had it, and okay if it doesn't happen. So within the project, it's helpful when everyone can see it all in a list and prioritize within it. But in terms of resource management, that's like a whole. Although I was trying to think of a way in which you could apply an Agile concept to, at a very high level, prioritizing projects in the same way. But I guess it would be sort of pulling back. Yeah.
And then there was the issue about whether there might be a conflict with the mission of the nonprofit. And again, that's not something that Agile can always help with. However, that does illustrate that if you have management support of the project, that has to be maintained throughout the project. It can't just be at the beginning, because very often if you go to your executive director of the organization and they say, oh yeah, we're supporting this and we're on board, a month later they're off doing something else, and you have to work into the process that they continually show their support of the project. Otherwise people are not going to want to engage, because they're going to say, well, management's not on board, why should I do it?
So we identified a few things here, benefits of the Agile mindset. So you definitely see value earlier. Here's a couple ways in which it can be helpful. You see value earlier, you put it in front of people. It seems weird, counterintuitive, that you're reducing project risks by not planning every single thing up front. That's the part that it's, until you sort of get into the flow of it, it's hard to wrap your mind around. You think it seems counterintuitive, but you're diving in. You're not using all of the time up front, so you have more time to change course. You're sort of spreading out the risk amongst the project. You're able to respond to change more effectively. You're able to test in the real world, right, and adjust instead of waiting till the very end when it's too late. And you're able to work with fixed budgets or timelines. Now, people are like, wait, that's not right? That's why we use waterfall, because we have a fixed budget. But actually, I would say it's the opposite, because you can actually, as long as you understand that you need to be scoping the requirements to fit the timeline and the budget, right? So all of our projects that are Agile are fixed budget and fixed timeline. So the thing that is variable is the requirements, which sounds horrifying up front. You're like, but we have to have all those things. There's no way we can't have all of those things. But what it does is it makes you think creatively about the minimum viable product. What's the simplest thing you can put out that's going to work? And 9 times out of 10, when people have a simple version of a thing and it actually accomplishes what they need, it's enough. And then everything from there is kind of cake. It's like frosting.
This is one of the hardest things for people to grasp onto, the fact that a project is not going to have a fixed set of deliverables, that set is going to change over time, which is why you have to keep prioritizing your list of all the things that are on the backlog, and you may get 20 or 30, you may get 25 or 30, you don't know at the beginning, it depends on how the priorities shift.
The analogy I always use is, would you rather end up with a house, with no roof and like half of a bathroom, right? Or would you rather, have a simple bathroom and a simple roof? It's like, it's counterintuitive, but it actually gets you to what you want faster. So it's not for every project or team, and this is where you have some very real experience about this. So this is Norman's recent experience. So again, we're not selling Agile. It's like Here's something that might be useful. Sometimes it's not so useful. You tried it with a vendor, didn't go so well.
Yeah, so here's what happened in my organization. We haven't had exactly a wonderful experience. That doesn't mean that I'm saying that Agile is not a good idea. Obviously, I wouldn't be doing this presentation if I didn't believe in it. However, we had a problem. We had a vendor that came in and they said, oh, we're going to use Agile for this project. And we said, oh, that sounds good. But the problem is that people in our organization weren't used to doing things in an Agile way. They didn't know the buzzwords. They didn't know the way that it plays out. So they started throwing out terms that is about user stories and about sprints and stuff. And people, started looking a little glassy-eyed when they heard those terms. So they really, the vendor didn't take the time to explain to us how Agile was going to work for us. I mean, they said, oh, it was a good idea, but they didn't say why and how it related to us. They also, the idea of a sprint is that each sprint kind of exists on its own, and then at the end of the sprint, you have something to put in front of your users. When we started this project over a year ago, our users haven't seen a thing. So to me, that's not Agile, because as sprints go on, each one should have another set of deliverables that you can put in front of people. And then finally, our internal team really didn't take the time up front to really think through what exactly are the business processes that they want in the system. And not that things don't change along the way, but in our case, that was having to redo over and over again the same type of discussions has made it really challenging. So again, end users haven't been involved. They were involved a little bit at the beginning, and I told them, well, it's on the way, but they haven't been involved in the conversation. So I don't know how this project is going to end up, but my guess is that it's not going to have the results we hoped for, because it's taken such a long time to get through it, and the fact that we haven't been able to deliver short-term deliverables to people that they can actually use. It's kind of like a hybrid of Agile and Waterfall together, and sometimes that's not a bad way to go, but in our case, it has to work.
It's so easy to say, we use Agile and here's our process, we follow these steps, and then just sort of start with the process first. You really, if the underlying concepts, if they're not there, if you don't actually do these things, it actually doesn't work. It literally, and then it's so easy to just feel like, well, I guess Agile doesn't work, right?
You have a question?
Yeah, well, would you say, though, that if you didn't get to see the iterations of, what this vendor was creating for you, they may have come in saying, we're working Agile, we're using user stories, blah, blah, and Scrum. But if you, as a stakeholder, weren't seeing it along the way, then they weren't being that Agile, presumably.
Right.
Would you agree?
Yeah, I mean, the question was just about...
It's like iterative waterfall.
Yeah, exactly. So the idea is that under a truly Agile process, they would have had something in much shorter intervals to show us.
To show your proof, so
Yeah.
you could say, instead of the waiting game.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one of the reasons why I think it hasn't played out very well.
Yeah. So what types of projects do work best with Agile, or what types of situations? So yes, definitely. It's a project that has evolving needs, which is a lot of them, but not all of them, right? You have buy-in from the team. I don't really understand how to do this if you haven't educated the team and you don't have some buy-in. It is possible to talk to people about the value of it and give examples of it and to win them over to at least give it a shot. Because what are you doing? It's like, let's try an iteration. Let's try 2, right? It's not the whole budget. Let's see how it goes. It is possible to do that, and more than possible, it's necessary, because if they don't buy in again to the underlying concepts, then you'll just go back to your sort of human nature ways, which is like, just go get it done. Yeah, we'll fix all that stuff later. All the stuff that's just innate in us and how we want to work. People have to value collaboration. And I mean not say they value collaboration, but actually think that when like the hive mind is smarter than the individual mind. That's a philosophical way of looking at the world. And it's hard to work this way if you don't have that. You have to believe that more minds on a project or on an issue are better, even if it takes longer, right? Yeah. Right.
How do you overcome that? If people traditionally think that, one person's directive is better than
Right.
collaboration. How do you?
Yeah, I think, I was just going to say, basically you have to examine the culture of the organization. If you feel that this style of collaboration is likely to be a stretch for your organization, then you may want to consider whether this is the right approach. Because obviously, if people are not used to working together, and I'm not, there are organizations that I've worked for where people kind of like, they're cliquish and each department kind of hangs out on themselves. A project's not like that. People in different departments need to work together on an ongoing basis to make this work. And if that's something unfamiliar or something that they're going to resist, this probably is not going to work.
I'd also say, though, just on a slightly more hopeful note, that when you, a lot of times I'll just say, let's just try it, which is kind of the Agile mindset. Let's just jump in. And it has its own kind of energy where once people start to see results, it builds trust. And it's like, I hadn't thought about that. When like a lot of times I'll start out like with the meetings, I don't really want to be here, why am I here? Just tell me when it's done. But if you just persevere through it, it can win them over, just the actual energy of it. Not always, but sometimes. Yeah.
Suggestion is find a project that nobody really knows the answer in the organization.
Yeah.
Because it's a place where you can then sort of trust the hive mind and figure it out.
Yeah. It's magical once you start seeing the hive mind work. I think it's like a kind of mini religious experience. Or like what I do, but I went to divinity school, so maybe. But that's like, I feel like that's, to see that process, it's like the Ouija board or something. You start to really see forces at work. Yeah. Some planning can happen. You have to, maybe you have a grant or you have something that's like, it has to be like this. It can't be anything differently than this. There is no room for change. There literally is no room for change. It's going to be hard to work this way. So you have to be able to do some planning along the way and not submit like all the plans and it has to be exactly this way at the end. This is probably the biggest one. Is you have to ask yourself and ask the people you're trying to talk to about the value of working this way. Is quality more important than predictability, right? That's really the big question. At the end of the day, we may not know, we may be in a place where we may not know exactly. Sure, it is true, it is absolutely true. We don't exactly know what we're going to get. And people are like, what? I can't possibly tell people that, right? But you know generally, and you know you'll get your most important things, or at least a simple version of that, right? And what's most important is deep quality, not like does it have bugs or is it broken or does it not work for people, but like is it quality in the sense that it works and it's really what people need and want, right? So it's quality through and through, right? Is that more important than you right now understanding exactly what you're going to get, right? That's the question to ask. So what type? Yes, so maybe not. Here's the projects in which maybe not so much. We have several projects where we run full-on waterfall because basically we're just building the same thing we already built. We know how to do it. Or we're doing a basic installation of a thing that we've done 100 times. It's just what it is. So it's like step 1, 2, 3, 4. Sometimes we'll run like planning phases of something, of a project, pretty much waterfall. We do this, then we do this, then we do this, and we do this. And then there's a kind of foundation layer sometimes for a project that needs to be laid, whatever that is, tech or not. Like this just has to be in place. So why iterate on that? That's stupid. It's like forcing something into a place that it doesn't make sense. So you just build it, you finish those tasks, and you can still do it in chunks and check in, but it's not iterating. It's just like phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. So static needs a repeat project. Maybe you don't need Agile. Just do it, right? If team doesn't see the value of Agile, then you become the type A, like, do this, no, we have to, it's like the whole thing is just going to fall down. You can, like I was saying earlier, give it a shot and hope to win them over, but if you don't eventually win some core people over, it's never going to work because it's you as the project manager telling them what to do, and then it's not a hive mind.
And you have no formal authority over anybody anyway, so,
If your project owner just wants it done, just go away, just want it done. They're not going to get what they need. They're not going to get what they want. They're going to get what they told you at the beginning, and you have to submit to the forces greater than you. There's nothing, like, they have to at least agree to be involved in some way. And there's so many ways in which, when we worked, we had one client who was like, the main stakeholder who was going to be the parachute, I just knew it. We had to wrap ourselves around her schedule. Whatever she literally would be like, tell me the 5 minutes in your week that you have to think about this, and we will drop everything during those 5 minutes and show you where we are. Like, it was absolutely essential, and we had to really go to her and make that happen, and work against her tendencies to just be like, make it happen, because I knew that it was going to fail if she didn't see it. Team prefers to work on their own. Yeah, if they're like, give me a task, I'll go get it done. If that's the culture, that has to change or it's not going to work. These are non-negotiable, really, but they're not insurmountable. It takes time, but you can win people over, but if you don't win them over, it's not going to work. And if everything has to be planned in advance, yeah, go ahead.
Prior one team prefer to work on their own. I mean, you get some that will and then some that don't.
Yeah.
So
I feel like if you have a couple who are in there who understand the value of collaborative, and you have some tools to make that possible, if you're virtual, or some ways in which you make them interact with each other, they start to see the value of it. But at some point, it's kind of like, this is how it is.
yeah, it takes longer to catch on to some other people, but sometimes you have to have a balance.
And if they see the value of it, that's okay. Nobody's going to be won over until they see what they've done by working
Being your best ambassador, basically trying to get other people on board. But if not, I have ended up doing one-on-one. You know, I have to change my styles. It's like,
Yeah.
change it. Switch yourself into it, but you have no choice.
So again, if predictability is more important than quality, yeah, it's not going to work. So we get to the final piece. How are we on time? We should probably... Oh, yeah. So we're just going to zip through this really quick. This is really just some examples, and then let's talk. So simple Agile process. This you can apply to any concept, any project, it could be tech, not tech. You define the needs, the outcomes. What's the period of time? Is it 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 1 month? What are the work periods? And you define the MVP. You just say, what are we going to work on? Let's all agree. And then you work. Then you check in at the end of the work period. And then you assess, you remove the blocks, you adjust the process. So easy to skip this and just be like, oh, let's just keep going. There's a little bit of work more. Let's just finish that last thing. You time box it. No matter where you are, you put your pencils down and you do this piece. Then you add new needs. You reprioritize everything. This adding new needs, that's scary, but there are new needs that will happen. Then again, you select the outcomes for the second period of work, and then you work. There it is. Very simple. It's like the simplest version of the process, right? This is a Trello. It's a tool some of you may have seen. It's the simplest, I find, for the most simple internal projects. Improve our lunchroom. Here's the needs. Here's what's scheduled. Here's what's in progress. Here's what's finished. Here's what's been quote-unquote accepted by whoever's the sort of owner. And you start with the important stuffs. You know, staff can like have a place to put their food or a place to sit down. Like, this is for improving our lunchroom. The minimum viable product is a place to eat. And then you add in the things like they can get massages while they're eating later. Yeah. Here's a more complex Agile process. This is very similar to what I use now with my team, but of course it changes all the time. Again, feel free to look back at these slides and you can see it's basically the same thing, just more fancy, and with client review process. And of course, with the client reviews it and they're like, this is not what you said you were going to build, then we go back and we do it again. And we just keep doing this until basically we built what we said we were going to build, which they helped us define. And then we release it, and then it goes through the same cycle again. And this is a much more complex tool. At my company right now, we use Pivotal Tracker, which is just for more complex projects. It's just a very simple drag and drop interface, done, current, backlog, and it helps. It's all color coded and you can drag things around, and I can say to the clients, do you care about this bug, or do you care about that bug, or do you care about this bug, or do you care about that bug? And we just drag it around while I'm talking to them in real time. And then this is the client area, and then we schedule it. This is my team right now. We're working on the ACLU. We just finished the ACLU website. We're building a bunch of other ACLU websites, and this is from that project. And then this is what's done. This is just, if you want to see later, if you want to look at this, this is just a more detailed view of the current column. So you can see the developers, this was as of 2 o'clock today. You can see in progress what's happening. So accept, reject, the client is about to look at it. This is when it's in orange, it means that the tester is testing, and then this is when it's being worked on. And then a few tips. Do you want to talk about these?
Yeah, so these are just some general things that Monica and I came up with that we thought might be helpful. So again, don't get hung up on the terminology, don't get hung up on the tools that we've shown you. It's really about the mindset and about doing things on a shorter time frame and having more of a collaborative style. Adhere to the process, let it evolve along the way. That's what Agile is about, that things will change and that it's not a scary thing, it's expected. The roles are not so important. Everybody is together on the team, and it's not a matter of who does what. It's a matter that they're all basically working together to make something done. If you want to try Agile at your organization and you haven't tried it before, start with something small. So give people experience on how it works.
Build the magic.
Don't use it for your new website right away.
Yeah.
Don't use it for replace your CRM database. Use it for like enhancing your lunchroom, like Monica showed you. Something that people can wrap their heads around. And if you're thinking about bringing in a vendor, then either first educate your own team on some of the terminology, some of the principles, so people kind of, you get the feel whether or not people are bought in on the whole idea. And if you do decide to go with a vendor or a consultant, make sure they understand that part of their job is to train your staff to work in an agile way. It's not just to come in and do it, it's to show people that this is a different way of working than what they're used to, and to help them kind of understand that training is part of their job.
Yeah. We have a couple resources up here for you guys. I'll point out consultancyscrum.org just has a lot of great stuff about working with clients and vendors, like how do you adapt. I always say that I do hybrid Agile, just because it's a little bit of a lot of different things that just work, and it keeps changing project to project, and that talks a lot about that. Do you have any favorites on your list?
Well, my favorite is the first one, because that's mine.
Oh, there.
I had done a presentation for NTEN some years ago, which not about Agile, but just about project management, because what I found back then is that nonprofits don't seem to understand what project management is, and a lot of them don't even, they don't have a familiarity with the concept. So I went back and I just updated that presentation, and if you get the slides, you'll see a link to it, and you can go in and you can take a look at it.
Yep.
And these are some final ideas on if you're thinking of bringing in a vendor, if you're trying to sell the idea, just some questions.
Yeah. Well, we want your questions, so this is our chance to talk. Yeah. So tell me, talk.
There was a talk about fixed price projects or fixed budget projects and timelines.
Yeah.
Typically that is associated with a long-term project.
Yes.
Especially working with non-profits, they have a fixed price and a fixed budget.
Yes.
So how does it go in an agile way? Because in an agile way, requirements keep changing. So how do you maintain a fixed budget and timeline?
How do you make a fixed budget and timeline when the requirements keep changing?
Right, especially in an agile way.
Yeah. That is exactly how you do it, is by allowing the requirements to change and being okay with that, right? So you're constantly reprioritizing. So if you try and fix all three, the timeline, the budget, and the requirements, not possible, right? But it's by the idea of scoping and constantly re-scoping and reframing what it is that needs to get done, that you're able to do that, which is a terrifying concept, but not if you apply some of the underlying principles, if that makes sense. So then you say, we only have this much time to spend on it, so you need to tell us, you're in charge of telling us what gets done during that time. Yeah.
So there cannot be a fixed budget in that case. If the timeline keeps changes, the budget will go up and down.
So the timeline's fixed and the budget's fixed, yeah, it can be. That's one way to work. It doesn't have to be, but yeah. Other questions or thoughts or situations that you're working on right now in which this might be helpful for other people to hear? Yeah.
When you talk about the deliverables at the end of a sprint or an iteration, are you talking, and you talk about something users can use, are you talking about your stakeholders and testers as users, or a final product out the door?
Well, I mean, I can say in the context, sometimes you have to do internal testing for a while before it's to a place where, just an end user, like a person who doesn't know anything about the project, can test it. I just try and get to that place as soon as possible. And I try and say, let's try and get it in front of the people who are actually going to be using whatever this thing is. And I'm trying really hard to not use only tech language, because I'm trying to help you guys envision how this can be used in other ways. But just putting it in front of people who will be using the thing as soon as possible, even if it's not done, because then you'll get real feedback. So sometimes there'll be a bunch of internal cycles where it's like just the testers, then it moves to releasing to like an internal pre-selected group of testers, then it's releasing to, and it kind of gets, those circles get wider and wider. But I just try and drive that as quickly as possible, and people resist it. Because again, that's a human nature thing. You're like, I want it to be perfect before they see it.
Yeah, I can also talk to this because in our organization right now, I'm part of a team of testers that have been going through this application that we've been building. That's not a bad idea. However, you still need to get the end users involved. Right. You can't leave them out of the process. In our case, the end users haven't seen this because the feeling has been, well, we can't show it to them yet because we don't want them to see something that's not ready.
Right.
But if you keep saying that over and over again, eventually
if I had it done.
They haven't seen it at all. By the time they finally see it, they're going to say, I can't use this. Right. So you have to bring them in, and you have to explain to them, this is not a final product. It's still going through changes, but we need your feedback.
I'm not talking about rolling it out so that data entry clerks are using it. You're talking about having them participate in the feedback.
No,
yes.
Also, use it all the way, but don't wait till the end of the project to do that. So actually all the way to the end users, possibly, right? That's the goal. Because when they start entering the data, that's when they're really, you're like, I can't get feedback from anybody. Nobody will tell me what they need. Well, when you put it in front of them and they're actually using it, all of a sudden they're going to have a whole lot of things to say about it. And wouldn't you rather have them say those things while you still have budget left, right? Or time?
Yeah, and the other challenge with this is that if you ask them to do that, but you say, well, you need to use the old system too, right. So now you've got double data entry, and that means they have to spend more time. So it means you have to go to their manager and you have to say, I'm going to need your commitment that they're going to need more time to do not only their regular work, but to help us test the new system. Because if they don't do that testing, the new system won't be what they want. Won't give them the results they want. It's a really difficult balance.
We're starting to get close to time. Let's get one more question from the audience.
Yes.
Hello.
Rabia.
So there are two things. I'll make it one thing. So my nonprofit has been traditionally grassroots, and it is getting to the point where it's growing and becoming more professional. And I'm like a middle manager. So I was brought in because I have expertise. I come from nonprofits where people use project management, people did all kinds of cool tech projects, and they worked. Our senior leadership team, brilliant people, not as familiar with what it takes to successfully execute a project. How would you recommend that we educate those leaders on project management concepts in a way that's not threatening and in a way that's sensitive to the cultural change?
Well, one thing I could say, and then Monica probably has other ideas, is that you need to work with them one-on-one. You can't embarrass management in front of a group of people and make them feel like they should know something that they don't. So you have to really find time to just one-on-one give them some personal attention. And that means that it may take some time for you to reach a point where they're comfortable participating in a project management process, because you first have to explain to them why it's a good idea and what their role is going to be. And if you haven't done that, then you're kind of like sabotaging yourself. So it's a time-consuming process. But if you already have a good relationship with the staff, which I hope you do, with the team, and they have your trust, and you explained it in a way that this is something that will help. Well, here's another thing you can tell them. Projects have notoriously have had a high rate of failure. You go anywhere on the web, you'll see studies from the Standish Group that talk about how most projects fail. And you can say that this is to address the problems of projects not being completed successfully, and this is a way, it's not a guarantee, but it's a way to help have a better result.
I mean, in a way, that's sort of the hope here in this, and trying to abstract it from all the lingo, that it would give or equip you with more of the concepts and the value of it, so that you can explain it in a sort of non-technical or complicated terms. Like, here's Like seriously, this is a great thing. It works, and this is why it works. Not, because of all this mumbo jumbo or because it's, but for us, this is what it does for us, very tangibly, and what it's done for other people, and giving concrete examples. I mean, I spend a huge amount of time laying the groundwork for a project. We spend weeks, months sometimes laying the groundwork for a big project. Like the ACLU project took us 1.5 years to build. It was 6 months just getting our heads wrapped around what we were about to do. And not just, we were working with their tech department, but also bringing in all of the stakeholders and lots of slideshows and lots of interactive, conversation about what it meant to iterate and all of that kind of stuff. It definitely takes time, but you can make it fun.
Also, find another organization like yours that your management respects and ask them whether they've had success with this type of approach and ask if they would be willing to share their experience.
So we'll be around to talk after. I'm sorry that we just tried to zip as fast as we could through that. I wanted more time to talk, but email, Twitter, or I'll be here standing. We can talk some more.
Yeah, actually, if you go to the next slide, you have our contact. Feel free to contact us, and we'll be happy to answer any further questions or help with your Agile transition.
Yeah.
Thank you all for coming.
Thanks.